every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 9:30 on Thursday, on Friday, the 27th. Is it 27th? What's the
I think it's the 27th.
It is the 27th. It's just, it wrote Thursday for us, and it is, of course, Friday, because this is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Emily Carver. Don't worry, we'll compose ourselves. Coming up today.
Yes, today, Friday, top Tory accused of rape. The former Justice Minister, Crispin Blunt, has been arrested in connection with an allegation of rape and possession of a controlled substance. The MP said he was confident he would not be charged with any offence.
A huge challenge. That's how a group of MPs described the challenge faced by the Home Office to tackle the asylum backlog. The current reforms are being labelled incomplete and unrealistic. We'll have the very latest.
More funding required. That's the message from the Local Government Association when it comes to our councils, as vital local services are under threat. GB News reporter Theo Jakomba is in Woking.
We'll have the latest from Woking, where there are concerns about potential cuts to services after the Borough Council announced bankruptcy this year.
Whitewashed report. That's how GB News presenter Nigel Farage has described the long-awaited Financial Conduct Authority review into his de-banking row with NatWest. We'll have the latest.
Yes, that's what's coming up today on the show, so stay tuned and let us know all of your thoughts as we go on the talking points we have for you. So email us at gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, before that, let's get your morning news with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. MPs are warning vulnerable people are being put at risk by the Home Office under its plans to clear the asylum backlog. The Public Accounts Committee says the government's current business case for reform is incomplete and unrealistic. At the end of June this year, there were almost 68,000 asylum cases awaiting a decision. The government, though, says it's working to end the use of hotels and clearing the backlog. British citizens fleeing the Middle East conflict will be able to access benefits after arriving in the UK. This also includes Brits escaping from Lebanon and the West Bank. They'll be able to claim universal credit as well as disability and child benefits without delay. They can also access social housing and housing assistance if needed. Meanwhile, hundreds of UK lawyers have sent an open letter to the Prime Minister asking him to press for a ceasefire to allow aid into Gaza. NHS waiting lists could top 8 million by next summer, even if strike action doesn't continue. The Health Foundation says the number will peak at 8 million by August before starting to come down. But if strikes were to continue, the list could be 180,000 people higher. More than 7.5 million people were waiting for treatment just last month. But the NHS says it's making progress, claiming they have more than halved the waits of more than 65 weeks. And around 1.7 million people could be living with dementia in England and Wales by 2040. That is according to UCL, which previously predicted the figure could reach 1.2 million. They found that dementia cases rose by a quarter between 2008 and 2016. The government has pledged it will provide £160 million a year for dementia research by 2025. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Welcome to Britain's Newsroom with me, Emily Carver, and Tom Harwood.
Yes, we've got a big show for you today, but first of all, let's dive straight into the news that broke last night. The Conservative MP Crispin Blunt was arrested on suspicion of rape and drug possession. He was later released on conditional bail.
Yes, the former Justice Minister publicly identified himself in a statement posted on X yesterday where he addressed the situation and he said he strongly believes he will not be charged.
But what does this say about the wider culture in Westminster and indeed the Conservative Party? Well, joining us in the studio is the Conservative MP and fellow GB News presenter, Philip Davies. Philip, thank you for joining us this morning. It does seem that in the last 2 years specifically, we've had quite a few sleazy stories about your colleagues.
Yes, we have. I mean, and it's not. This isn't a party political issue. I mean, there's been quite a few in other parties as well. And yeah, I mean, look, in terms of Crispin Blunt, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know anything about what's happened or what's gone on. And there's a proper process. The police will investigate it. The CPS will look at it, and it's a matter for them. I don't want to, speculate whether he's guilty or not. That's a matter for other people to determine.
I mean, it's not a great look, is it, with Peter Bone suspended for 6 weeks. We've had Chris Pincher, of course, sacked. That was after groping 2 men and a private members club for Conservatives. It's all not painting a very pretty picture, is it?
No, absolutely not. No, of course it isn't. Like I say, it's not a party political issue. I'm sure you could have read out a list of Labour MPs who faced similar issues as well. So, these are individual issues, and at the end of the day, it's not really about how it affects the Conservative Party or the Labour Party or whoever. There's people who are victims, and there are people who are being accused, and they're the people who this is important about. It's nothing to do with anybody's party political beliefs, is it really? At the
No, I suppose in this case we do know what's going on. Crispin Blunt took it upon himself to release a statement, otherwise we wouldn't really be able to talk about this in any sort of detail. Whereas on the other side of the green benches, there are some mysterious suspensions of members of Parliament. Something that often pops up is why on earth has the Labour MP Nick Brown not been in Parliament for the best part of, well, it's over a year now. There are some sort of curiosities on the other side that perhaps aren't as open.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, funny enough, I actually saw Nick Brown in Parliament yesterday, I think.
Oh, really?
So he has, but he definitely is in Parliament because I literally passed him on the escalator going up to Portcullis House.
Just suspended as a Labour MP.
So I understand, but look, I don't know the details of any of these things, and people say, oh, you must know what's going on there. All of these things, whenever they come out, they're a complete surprise to me. So it's not as if we're all there knowing what's going on and covering things up or anything. You've probably got your ear to the ground better than I have, Tom, around Westminster. But all of these things, when they've come out, they've been a complete surprise to me.
Well, Crispin Blunt, he did come under fire for previously defending Imran Ahmad Khan, who was convicted of sexual assault publicly. He then retracted that, but that wasn't a great sign, was it?
Well, it was
not that it's related to this case. Of course, Crispin Blunt says that he is not guilty, or he's confident that this won't end in a charge, but says something of the character, perhaps.
Well, I think that was a mistake. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not for any MP to second-guess the decision made by a jury, the jury that sat and listened to all of the evidence confidence.
Yeah.
And, you know, that I think any MP who starts second-guessing decisions made by juries is unwise, and I think that was certainly unwise. Although I wouldn't say that was a factor in this.
Yes, Rishi Sunak has a lot to deal with, doesn't he?
Certainly.
Could be another by-election, who knows?
Well, not least in terms of party discipline, but also in terms of policy, because also, Philip Davies, you're here to talk about the asylum backlog, which is a, quote, huge challenge. What's the Public Accounts Committee saying today?
Well, the Public Accounts Committee is saying quite rightly that there's a huge backlog, that it's an unacceptable level of backlog, and that the government's efforts to try and deal with it are inadequate. But they also say something different, and I have a slightly different perspective to the Public Accounts Committee on that. They're basically saying that speeding up the decision process may lead to bad outcomes and bad decisions, and they say they focus that on particularly vulnerable people. I would probably look at it from the other end of the telescope, to be honest. My fear about an obsession with reducing the backlog quickly is that you give a perverse incentive just to say, oh yeah, OK, we'll accept you into the country, we'll accept all of these cases. You get the backlog down really quickly, but I'm not entirely sure that's what the public would like to see. And so I think we should be careful when we just focus on that, because you will encourage a government just to say, well, we'll let everybody stay. You've got rid of the backlog, but I'm not really sure that's what the public
Yes, it has to be rigorous, and it was reported not too long ago that the interviews were being cut very short in order to address the backlog. Can you decide if someone is a legitimate asylum seeker and they have a legitimate claim if the interview process is really quick? I think a lot of people are worried about that. I think you're right. But also they talk about how we've got this backlog. We get through the backlog really quickly, but then we have a backlog in the courts because, of course, asylum seekers can refute, they can appeal if they don't get initial asylum.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. It's not easy for the government just to wave a magic wand and sort this out. Look, the solution to this problem is the solution that Boris Johnson identified, that Liz Truss agreed with, which Rishi Sunak has adopted, which is deporting people to Rwanda. That is the only solution to this particular problem. And, of course, we are awaiting the Supreme Court's verdict on whether they judge that to be lawful or not. And the government, therefore, can't proceed with that. But ultimately, that is the solution to this problem.
I mean, is it a solution to deport everyone to Rwanda? Because as far as I understand it, there are only a couple of thousand spaces in Rwanda, and there are 67,870 legacy cases of individuals whose cases need to be processed. If only 2,000 of them or so can go to Rwanda, that's not a solution. I suppose the government would argue it's more of a deterrent.
Yeah, I mean, Suella said that Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, she said that the original cap on numbers that she'd negotiated away, and that Rwanda had agreed to take more than the original cap that had been. But I think you make a fair point, Tom, is that this isn't going to deal with all of these historic cases. But I think in order to do that and get the actual total number of backlog cases down, I mean, the government have halved the legacy cases, those that are over a year old or 18 months old. They have halved those, but of course they're still coming. It's the ones coming through the system that's clogging up the numbers. So if we can actually deal with that, then actually we have got the winning post in sight. There will be light at the end of the tunnel. And the only way we're ever going to get light at the end of the tunnel is if we start removing people to Rwanda, and people who are looking at coming across in a dinghy think, I'm not going to bother because I'm only going to end up back close to where I set off from.
Yes, as long as the boats keep coming, the backlog is going to be a problem. Exactly. So moving on to something closer to home even than that story is the BBC. Now, they've admitted that their Newsnight programme was biased and it breached editorial standards. Tell us more.
Well, look, I think everyone is aware of the BBC Newsnight programme into GB News, which basically had 3 guests on, all of whom were hostile to GB News, and which was completely unacceptable. Now, funnily enough, I didn't watch it live at the time, but I actually got a number of emails from my constituents saying that they'd watched it and they were really unhappy with it. I hadn't watched it at this point, but I forwarded it to the email, you know, the issue to Tim Davie, the Director General, and said, look, my constituents are not happy. Can I have your response? And the thing is, it's a really tortuous process because the BBC have this it's a very privileged situation where if you want to make a complaint about the BBC, you have to go to the BBC first.
Yeah, why do they have that? Why do they get that?
Well, it's sort of in the charter, and so they have this privileged situation. You can't go to Ofcom, you have to go to the BBC. So I went to Tim Davie. He replied and said that the Newsnight editor thought it was unacceptable and whatever. It was a bit of a mealy-mouthed apology, but they did accept it was wrong. So I went to Ofcom and said, look, I've had a BBC response. Now I want you to look into it. And Ofcom said, oh, no, you've got to go through the full BBC process before we can look into it. So I then had to put in a formal complaint through the website system. I then got a response to that and then went to Ofcom and said, oh, no, you've now got to go to the BBC appeals programme before you can... So, anyway, the whole thing's taken about over a month. And I think what happens is the BBC rely on everybody getting bored of the process and thinking, I can't be bothered with this, and therefore I can't be bothered to go to Ofcom. Anyway, ultimately, we've now completed the BBC complaints process. They've acknowledged that it wasn't right what they did, but again, it was a bit mealy-mouthed, and they spent most of their apology trying to justify what they've done rather than actually just giving a fulsome apology. So I have now referred it to Ofcom for them to investigate. They haven't confirmed yet that they are investigating it, but I have passed it on to them, and hopefully they will do their job. But, I mean, it is a terrible system that the BBC can, in effect, sort of bore people into submission.
Do you think this is a system that should face reform? Obviously, other channels are directly regulated by Ofcom, whereas the BBC gets to mark its own homework first. Should we change that system?
Well, it's not fair. It's clearly not fair, is it? It's clearly not. I mean, I think it's unjustifiable, really. I'm not blaming Ofcom here. They're tied by the rules. It's not their fault. The BBC find themselves in this privileged position, and I think it should be removed, and we should all be on a level playing field. All broadcasters should be on a level playing field.
I just think that's bad that you have to go through so many hoops so that most people, the vast majority of people, will just give up because they can't be bothered anymore, or so much time has passed since the programme. But the BBC did admit that they should have tried harder for balance at the time. They came out reasonably quickly to say that, but again, matter for Ofcom.
I mean, Ofcom did actually say to me in an email, they did actually say that they acknowledged that the very few complaints they tend to get about the BBC, they said to me, they thought were probably based on frustration rather than an endorsement of the BBC's process and final outcome. I mean, I think Ofcom are cognizant of the fact that the BBC are trying to bore people into submission before without them pursuing a complaint. But
I'm sure they would refute that.
Well, they probably would. But I mean, I think that's the conclusion I've come to, and I get the impression Ofcom think something similar.
Interesting stuff there. Well, Philip Davies, thank you so much for talking us through those three big issues for us this morning.
Thank you. Very interesting indeed.
Well, moving on, around 1.7 million people could be living with dementia in England and Wales by 2040.
Yes, a new report published by the Lancet Public Health shows the burden on health and social care might be considerably larger than currently forecast.
Well, joining us now is the Health and Social Affairs editor at the Sunday Express, Lucy Johnston. And Lucy, this seems like a pretty stark analysis. 1.7 million people. How do we find these numbers?
Well, in fact, this is it sort of follows hot on the heels of another report which shows that, in fact, 1 in 5 of us will be living with a major disease by 2040. So that's a sort of 37% increase on figures now. So we have a tsunami of ill health and aging population which is coming at us, and it really underlines the need for urgent reform of the NHS and of social care, without which we will not be able to deal with it. I think political parties, none of them seem to have the vision to do anything bold or brave to fix these problems, and they just seem to, it's like a broken radio. Fiddling around with the problem, with the knobs, is not going to fix it. We need to do something, I think, much more radical.
I mean, Lucy, the report says that dementia and the increase in dementia will be largely down to poor lifestyles. At least the increase is driven by poor lifestyles. How can the government intervene without being accused of being authoritarian or nanny statist? How can the government intervene and change those lifestyle choices so that we don't have this burden?
Part of the reason why people make what you might see as could call poor lifestyle choices is due to stress. So we know that about 1 in 4 cases of dementia are preventable. And that includes people smoking, alcohol and obesity. But these things happen due to poverty and due to stress of the economy. You know, it's a big picture thing. And yes, we could have public health messaging to encourage people to eat better and live better. But also we have to think about how we improve the lives and livelihoods and the sort of economy to help people live better. It's tough out there, and we know that our economy is in a mess. We've got a cost of living crisis, so we need to look at these things in the round, I think.
The UCL researchers sort of explained how the trend of more people getting dementia and fewer people getting dementia, it's been non-linear over the last 20 or 30 years. Some years it's up, some years it's down. I wonder, are there any sort of technological breakthroughs on the horizon? We keep hearing about new dementia drugs. We're hearing about the prospect of AI to get early intervention and diagnose this stuff early. Is there a technological bright horizon that we could be heading towards?
Well, some doctors are very excited about the new dementia drugs which are coming on stream, and they have called, there's one that's been announced recently called lecanemab, which seems to slow down the onset of dementia and slow down the cognitive decline. But these drugs are in very, very early stages, and there are quite serious side effects, so you have to think really carefully about whether you would want to go on those. And I think by the time there are symptoms of dementia, your neurons, you know, the brain has already been very damaged, and so it's quite difficult to bring in or look for drugs that can actually repair damage. What we need to really be thinking about is trying to prevent damage in the first place, and that's what we've got to get hold of. I think that's the most effective thing.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Lucy Johnston, the Health and Social Affairs Editor at the Sunday Express, with that report that dementia could double by 2040, and most of that driven to poor lifestyle choices. I'm hopeful, though, that scientists and innovation will help fix this problem. I mean, we've got that weight loss jab that's doing wonders for some people, at least.
Incredible. I mean, I'm a massive techno-optimist.
I know you are.
And I was at Rishi Sunak's AI speech yesterday.
Of course you were.
One of the things he said was that AI is being used. You can look at a normal retinal scan and not just see eye problems. If you run this through AI, you can see the likelihood for so many other diseases, dementia included. And so potentially early intervention on this stuff will be very easy, very cheap. It will save the NHS a lot of money.
I hope so, and the social care system, of course.
Well, let's turn now to a worrying warning for local councils this morning, as Local Government Association has written to the Chancellor to warn that local authorities do not have enough funding simply to stand still.
Yes, they cite increasing pressures on homelessness services, children's social care, transport for children with special educational needs and disabilities. These are all areas at risk.
Well, GB News' Theo Chakomba joins us now. And Theo, I suppose there are some councils that have been very much struggling, but there are others that have not been. How much of this is down to demand and how much of this is down to, frankly, council mismanagement?
Yes, well, very good morning to you. It's a multitude of those things which you have mentioned, but where I am this morning in Woking Borough Council declared bankruptcy earlier this year in June, and this is because of a situation which occurred in over a period of time lasting during when the Conservatives were running this Borough Council. It's now currently being run by the Liberal Democrats, and it's reportedly, we understand that they were spending money on things like skyscrapers and hotels, and that's left them with a deficit of £1.2 billion. Now, many people who live in this area will no doubt be looking at what's going to happen. So we understand from the council that they'll be having a meeting in February 2024 to discuss the steps, as there's currently a consultation happening at the moment, and then in September 2024 they will outline what's going to happen. There have been some areas being highlighted that may potentially have their funding cut, such as toilets, such as local dance facilities and swimming pools, so leisure facilities as well. And this might also mean that council tax has to go up, as we've seen similarly in Birmingham at the City Council, which has had some difficult, challenging times when it comes to finances earlier this year as well. And we understand there's been people sent there to try and rectify the situation there. But it is, of course, something that's been an issue for a while for many councils across the country. And as you say, the warning has come at a time when the autumn statement is due to be delivered in a couple of weeks' time, and many people will be looking to see whether or not the Chancellor will have any more money to plug that hole for many councils across the country.
Thank you very much indeed. Theo Chikomba there, our reporter from Woking, from the council. That it's going to be very difficult indeed for the government, for the Treasury to find money.
Oh, it certainly is. But I can't help thinking that, you know, Birmingham Council, which went bankrupt, Croydon Council, which went bankrupt, Woking Council, it's not every council. Some have been run well, some have been run poorly. Should we reward the badly run councils with bailouts from the taxpayer?
You raise a good point, although I would say that obviously some councils may have more pressures, demographic pressures.
That's true.
And whatnot. But still, oh, sorry, go on.
If you live in a council area where your council has gone bankrupt, get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com. That's the address to email. We'll be getting to those views and many other stories after this.
Hello, good morning. It's Alex Burkill here with your latest GB News weather forecast. A bit of a foggy start for some of us this morning, but then the unsettled theme continues with showers or longer spells of rain. Any mist and murk and fog will gradually clear as we go through the morning. Persistent rain affecting eastern parts of Scotland still. Totals continuing to build up as we go through into the weekend, so some issues here. Otherwise, a fair few showers developing, some of them heavy, perhaps even thundery, and becoming more widespread, pushing inland as we go into the afternoon. Some sunny spells though, and temperatures near normal for the time of year. Highs around 15 Celsius in the south, cooler further north. We're going to continue to see more rain across particularly eastern parts of Scotland as we go through Friday night. Might become a bit more widespread across other parts of Scotland through the night as well. Otherwise, plenty of showers again developing. These will be heavy at times across southern southeastern parts, could cause some impacts here as we go through the early hours of Saturday. Some clear skies around though, so we could see some mist and fog developing once more, and temperatures may be a touch lower than last night for quite a few places. Saturday then, a blustery, showery day for many places. Still seeing some cloud and rain across eastern parts of Scotland, which is why some issues are quite likely. Otherwise, heavy showers, especially towards the south, and notice a spell of wet and windy weather starting to push into the far south later on in the day. Temperatures similar to today for most, perhaps a touch higher for some places, getting into your mid-teens Celsius. Bye-bye.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
This time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good morning, it's 10 a.m. on Friday the 27th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom with me, Emily Carver, and the lovely Tom Harwood. Today on the show.
A huge challenge. That's how a group of MPs described the challenge faced by the Home Office to tackle the asylum backlog. GB News political reporter Olivia Utley has the latest.
The Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, has promised to end the use of hotels to house migrants. But this new report from a cross-party group of MPs pours cold water on his plans.
Top Tory accused of rape. The former Justice Minister, Crispin Blunt, has been arrested in connection with an allegation of rape and possession of a controlled substance. The MP said he was confident he would not be charged with any offence.
Whitewashed report. That's how GB News presenter Nigel Farage has described his long-awaited Financial Conduct Authority review into this debanking row with NatWest.
And BBC slammed. State of Israel's official Twitter account has tweeted out a damning BBC World parody video. Is this appropriate?
And we'd love to know what your thoughts are on all of the stories we discussed this hour. gbviews@gbnews.com is the address to write into, and we'll be getting to some of those in just a moment. But first, here is the latest headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Tom, thank you very much and good morning. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. MPs are warning vulnerable people are being put at risk by the Home Office under its plans to clear the asylum backlog. The Public Accounts Committee says the government's plans are incomplete and unrealistic. At the end of June this year, there were almost 68,000 asylum cases awaiting a decision. Shadow Environment Secretary Steve Reid says the Tories have lost control of the situation.
taking an immense amount of time to deal with individual cases, and while those cases are being, while people are waiting for their cases to be dealt with, they're being put up in hotels at a staggering cost of £8 million a day. It's shocking. What Labour would do is, instead of using that money on hotel bills, we would use it to recruit 1,000 additional civil servants to deal with these cases faster. That would reduce the hotel bill, the scheme would pay for itself, and then you would get the cases processed much faster.
However, the Education Secretary Gillian Keegan says the government already has measures in place to deal with the backlog.
We have got tough on immigration. We're the people who have introduced new legislation because obviously you have to have the law behind you. We've also obviously had the Rwanda policy, which is still in the courts, but that is part of the policy, and we've also got returns agreements now with a number of countries and a new agreement with France as well. We're also looking at alternatives to hotels to bring that bill down to the taxpayer. So we are the ones taking all of the actions, but there is no doubt that this is a huge problem.
Hamas says the Israeli bombing of Gaza has killed 50 hostages so far. It comes as Israel intensified its attacks on the Strip, striking dozens of terrorist targets over the past couple of days. Hamas says it can't release hostages seized during an attack on Israel until a ceasefire is agreed. It claims it needs time to locate all those who'd been taken from Israel to Gaza. British citizens fleeing the Middle East conflict will be able to access benefits after arriving in the UK. This also includes Britons escaping from Lebanon and the West Bank. They'll be able to claim universal credit as well as disability and child benefits without delay. They can also access social housing and housing assistance if needed. Meanwhile, hundreds of UK lawyers sent an open letter to the Prime Minister asking him to press for a ceasefire to allow aid into Gaza. The letter says the UK needs to follow international law and not encourage, aid or assist the law's violation by others. NHS waiting lists could top 8 million by next summer, even if strike action doesn't continue. The Health Foundation says the number will peak by August before starting to come down. But if strikes were to continue, the list could be 180,000 higher. More than 7.5 million people were waiting for treatment just last month. But the NHS says it's making progress, claiming they've more than halved waits of more than 65 weeks. Around 1.7 million people could be living with dementia in England and Wales by 2040, according to new research. The rising number of cases, 40% more than previously thought, means the burden on health and social care might be considerably larger than currently forecast. The study, led by UCL, previously suggested cases in 2040 would reach 1.2 million. The Department of Health and Social Care has promised to provide £160 million a year for dementia research by 2025. And finally, plans have been approved by Merton Council to expand the All England Tennis Club. The decision followed a lengthy planning committee meeting, which concluded just last night. The grounds will almost triple in size, including 38 new tennis courts, and allow Wimbledon to host the qualifying tournaments rather than miles away in Roehampton. Completion is projected for 2030 and will see an increase in the capacity of the championships from 42,000 to 50,000. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Thank you, Tatiana. It is 10:06 in the morning. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver, and Tom Harwood. We've got lots of emails coming in this morning, haven't we?
We do, and particularly what's got people talking is this issue of councils going bankrupt. Of course, we saw a few examples earlier, but some people have been writing in to ask whether their councils have gone bankrupt. Fiona has written to say, hope Tandridge Council isn't bankrupt. We pay the highest council tax in Surrey. It's like a small mortgage, and I'm suspicious as to what the council spends it on. Well, I'm delighted to say, Fiona, that Tandridge Council is not bankrupt, probably because they charge you through the nose. But again, I suppose that does emphasise, you know, councils that are responsible with their finances don't go bankrupt. Councils that aren't do. Should we reward those that are irresponsible?
I mean, I grew up in the Council of Haringey. And the things that they spend money on is ludicrous. They spent tens of thousands of pounds on changing road signs because they weren't deemed politically correct. And even the residents of said street didn't want the change anyway. It's just ridiculous. Angela says when some leaders of councils earn more than the Prime Minister, councils are also very much overstaffed, too generously paid, little or no regard to timekeeping, unable to be sacked. Well, you make some important points there. Also, there are South Cambridgeshire, I believe it was, that council decided that a 4-day working week would be the right thing to do for their employees. But the problem was that people couldn't get in touch for very important services.
Oh, there you go. It's all good. It's good on the production side, not on the accessing side. Well, Trisha has written to say councils, salaries high, expenses high, civil service pensions high. What's left for people who pay rates and government money? Also, wastage. She says that she is a parish councillor where nobody is paid, no expenses, and we cannot waste a penny. So that's the line from Trisha this morning.
Yes, also speaking to councillors in Maidenhead, which is Theresa May's constituency, talking about all the extra facilities that they're being told they need to offer because of the migrant hotels. So things like extra bus trips, extra services, all of that sort of thing doesn't seem to be coming from central government. So they've got to find it somehow from their local residents.
Although
it's very difficult.
I do think there is a point here. Sometimes councils are to blame for blocking development. If you're not building more houses, you don't have more people paying council tax, then you're going to have to charge higher council tax to those that already live there. Potentially, if councils were approving more development, they wouldn't be going so bankrupt.
There's a controversial opinion, and I imagine some people at home are thinking, not more development in my beautiful area, but we shall see.
It depends how it's done, as always.
We've got lots of emails also coming in on immigration and asylum policy, that backlog, who's to blame, what should we do about it, etc., etc. We'll get to those later, so please do keep them coming in.
Now, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, pledged the Home Office would clear a huge number of asylum claims by the end of this year. Well, it seems he's nowhere near delivering.
A report by a cross-party committee says a huge challenge remains for the Home Office, and the government's plan to reform the asylum system to speed up the process is incomplete and unrealistic.
Well, we're joined now by Olivia Utley, our political correspondent from our Westminster studio. And Olivia, it's a damning report, this.
It's a very damning report. We heard a bombastic speech from the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, earlier this week, saying that the government would end the use of hotels to house migrants over the first half of next year. That was greeted very, very warmly by the Conservative backbenchers. There are currently about 400 hotels in use, housing around 50,000 migrants at a cost of £8 million a day to the taxpayer. Robert Jenrick said that because his government had managed to clear the backlog, or at least halve the backlog of asylum claims, and because policies like the enforcing migrants to share rooms instead of having one room each were coming into effect and were beginning to work, he had capacity to be able to free up some of those hotel rooms and end some of those contracts. Well, this report today, which is from the Public Accounts Committee, which is a group of cross-party MPs, has really poured cold water on almost everything he said in that speech in the Commons. They point out, essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, but that Robert Jenrick was massaging the statistics a little bit. Rishi Sunak claimed that he would clear the legacy backlog, that is, the backlog of asylum claims before 2022 by the end of this year. Robert Jenrick said that he had already halved it. Well, yes, he has halved it, but of course, while those legacy claims have been being dealt with, more migrants have been coming in across the channel. So the overall backlog of asylum claims is even bigger than it was. As the Public Accounts Committee says, even if he does manage to clear that legacy backlog by the end of the year, there will still be another 84,000 or so claims to be processed. The other thing that this report points out is that the problem with clearing the backlog insofar as the government has done it is that those cases, the backlog of cases currently going through the system in the Home Office, end up simply going to the courts because these people who have their cases dealt with too quickly go to appeal, and then the backlog is essentially moved from one place to the other rather than fixed. This is going to be a huge headache for the government. The Labour Party have already said that they would fix the problem by employing 1,000 new Home Office caseworkers to get claims processed faster. Will the Conservatives do something similar?
It's very difficult for the government, isn't it? Because on the one hand, if you process claims faster, then this moves to the court system because people are appeal. Also, there's the worry that if you process claims too quickly, you make the wrong decision and you could end up sort of just rubber stamping people through without giving enough care to their particular cases. I mean, what exactly are the Labour Party proposing that would be different besides just dealing with the backlog faster?
Well, the Labour Party has said that it would employ 1,000 new caseworkers. They believe that the problem is that rather than expanding the capacity of Home Office officials dealing with these claims, the Conservatives have simply piled more work on the existing caseworkers. The Conservatives have massively sped up the process. At the beginning of this year, around 400 asylum claims were processed each week. That's now about 4,500, at least according to government figures. The Labour Party thinks it could speed that up even more by employing 1,000 extra caseworkers. That would obviously be very expensive, but they argue that it would pay for themselves because they would be able to close down some of these migrant hotels. It all sounds great in theory, but do the numbers add up?
It does seem like this is an intractable problem, but it didn't used to be a problem half a decade ago. People weren't languishing on these waiting lists to be processed for more than a year, as many individuals are now. This sort of change in the system, or at least this gunging up of the system that led to people languishing in hotels, a system that was designed so that people would only be there for a week or so while they were processed, clearly things need to be turned around. But what does the government say it's doing to change things, other than just chugging along as it is?
Well, the government has said that it will, implement policies such as enforcing migrants to share rooms. Obviously, the government's trying to progress with its Rwanda policy, which would see illegal migrants not have their claims processed at all, but simply be deported to Rwanda. And while there, officials would work out whether they had a claim or not. So that's the government's sort of main strategy when it comes to addressing this backlog. But as we know, it's in pretty sticky mud at the moment. No migrant has actually yet taken off to Rwanda, and we are expecting more legal delays, a Supreme Court case, etc. And while that Rwanda policy is just unable to progress forward at all, really, it feels as though the Conservatives need to come up with some sort of interim strategy. But as yet, it's not really been forthcoming.
Thank you very much indeed. Olivia Utley there, our political correspondent from the Westminster studio. It's incredibly difficult for the government. They do try to take action on this issue and it gets held up in the courts. The opposition always oppose any measure they wish to take that appears to be tough on this issue.
Although, on the other hand, I've also seen an interview with the immigration minister before saying we don't necessarily want to process people quickly because that could be a magnet to attract more people, which I fundamentally disagree with. I think the system should process people quickly and therefore not hold them in hotels.
I have sympathy with that view from the immigration minister, though, because I think a lot of people are worried that the government may well, in a bid to close the backlog, to get rid of the backlog, may just wave people through, and that is not the way to deal with asylum claims, in my humble opinion.
No, I think I completely agree with you there, but there must be a way to do it thoroughly and quickly. How has that escaped the possibility of the British state in the last half-decade or so?
Well, I guess it's how many resources do you want on this one issue?
Wow.
It's a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of people.
But when you're spending so many £1 million a day on hotels, perhaps rediverting that would be a better port of call. But
well, so the Tory MP Crispin Blunt was arrested on Wednesday morning. That was on suspicion of rape and drug possession. He was later released on conditional bail.
Yes, the former Justice Minister publicly identified himself on a statement posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, yesterday, and he said he strongly believes he won't be charged.
Yes, so in the studio with us is former advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley. Charlie, what do we know about this case? What's he been accused of exactly, and the political reaction?
Well, it's a serious allegation of rape and imposition of controlled substances. He denies it all. He put a statement out last night, and the police will continue to investigate. Now, I think for what it's worth, in terms of the case, it's quite unusual for someone that is being investigated by the police with such a serious allegation to out themselves, as it were. And I think, to be fair in a PR sense, obviously you can't comment on any of the allegations at all, but I think it was the right thing to do because he denies the allegations strenuously. It was a statement that was put out by Surrey Police. They gave his age and the location.
There are 9 Conservative MPs in Surrey, many of them very high-profile individuals. Do you think the reason he said, "It's me, I don't think I've done anything wrong, but I want to take the..." Do you think that was to take suspicion off other people, very high-profile names in that area?
Yes, I do. And I think also to own the story a bit more, because if you don't do that, and if you... look, and it's up to each individual that, again, we don't know where these allegations will end up. But if anybody is accused of anything like this, it's for those individuals to decide how they want to sort of handle that. But I do think, at a time where we're seeing things like, Peter Bone, Chris Pincher, we've seen things in Somerton and Frome and Tiverton and Honiton. We've seen a number of Tory MPs that have, for various different reasons, fallen way below the standard that is expected of them in public life. And to allow this narrative of Tory sleaze to fester in the minds of the British electorate in the run-up to a general election, when the Prime Minister is clearly trying to talk about things like AI and very important, and dealing with his top 5 priorities, it's not something that is helpful to the Tory party cause or the Tory government.
Yes, Rishi Sunak. People have their criticisms of Rishi Sunak, but he does seem to be straight down the line. And I would say he appears to be honourable. Having to deal with this kind of thing is not what he wants, as you say, when he's trying to talk about AI. So, yes, this is a massive distraction once again. We could potentially have another by-election, depending on what happens here.
Exactly, and that would be something that, the public will then, decide, and you'll get the pollsters talking, and if, depending which way it goes, when you go into a general election, you want momentum, really, to be on your side. Now, I think... the public still, on the back of the last 2 by-elections, and look, they were good wins for Labour. It was a very low turnout. But the circumstances in which those 2 MPs left their roles in Tamworth, Chris Pincher, and in Mid-Bedfordshire, Nadine Dorries, it's quite understandable why perhaps the Tory vote didn't turn out.
Although, is it right to be looking at turnout alone? Because I was looking at this, and it's certainly true that if you look at it on just a pure numbers basis, the Labour vote held, the Tory vote collapsed, and the Labour vote didn't add that much more compared to the last election. But that's exactly the same pattern that happened in 1996. You had a lot of seats that the Conservatives lost in by-elections in the run-up to the 97 general election, where actually the Labour vote didn't budge much, but the Tory vote collapsed. And perhaps it's indicative of the same amount of apathy from every party, but the Labour Party getting more votes in a proportional sense.
Absolutely, and it may be the case that, look, John Major, I think, was Prime Minister then for 7 years, from 1990 to 1997. Rishi Sunak has only been Prime Minister for a year. So the fact that the public, and with all the politics that we've seen, through Boris Johnson to Liz Truss to Rishi Sunak, the public, the electorate, aren't switched on in terms of politics per se at the moment. So when it comes to a general election, when you're actually hearing the arguments of policy, who can take the country forward and tackle the big decisions, I think Rishi might still be able to appeal to people.
Oh, really?
Even on his own, even if he has to sort of distance himself from the Tory brand versus the Rishi Sunak brand.
It's worth pointing out as well, isn't it, Charlie, that things aren't all rosy in the Labour Party. Dozens of councillors taking issue with Keir Starmer's position on Israel-Palestine. Also, even rumours of shadow ministers, people within his cabinet being very angry with him and disagreeing with him fundamentally. So things aren't so, rosy over that side either.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think, credit to Keir Starmer. He's done a lot, I think, over the last 4 years to transform the Labour Party, to take it back to a position where it is being looked at by the electorate. But you're absolutely right. It is effectively an opposition party. It's a campaign organisation. Campaigning is very different to being in government. And I think the Labour Party are getting the scrutiny now that they might not have had before. That scrutiny will only intensify if Keir Starmer is going to be the next Prime Minister. And we're going to see when they start to announce policies, instead of just U-turning on them or flip-flopping on them, when they start to announce more policies, there'll be more scrutiny and the public will actually be able to see what it's like, or what it could be like, under a Labour government versus a Conservative one.
It's an admirable defence that you're making in tough circumstances, Charlie. Thank you for putting across that case. And, of course, for balance as well, I think we should note the currently suspended, or at least the Labour MPs who were suspended over the course of this Parliament, including Claudia Webb, Jeremy Corbyn, Nick Brown, Christina Rees, Conor McGinn, Diane Abbott, Geraint Davies. Two, of course, resigned in disgrace in this Parliament, Mike Hill and Chris Matheson. And a couple have been suspended and then had their suspension undone. That includes Rupert Huck and Neil Coyle. So, of course, there are some Labour individuals who have run into hot water as well.
Gosh, Rupert Huck said Kwasi Kwarteng was superficially a black man.
Yes.
I remember that, actually.
She was sit on the naughty bench for a while, but then apologised and popped back into...
Deary me, it's like crowd control, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, that's what the whip's for, really.
But I think the interesting thing with some of these Labour names is we don't know why they've been suspended. And there's an air of mystery around it that perhaps, I don't know, maybe if they're in government this time next year, maybe a little bit later, perhaps there'd be more scrutiny on the Labour politicians who've been suspended, more questions as to why they've been suspended.
I think that's absolutely right. I think there's a bigger magnifying glass
on the governing, and quite rightly, if you're literally in the seat of power, then perhaps you should be under a greater deal of scrutiny.
Yes, lots of MPs have been in trouble and will continue to be, I'm sure. But still to come, LGB Alliance says that lesbians are facing extinction because of the disproportionate focus on transgender identities in schools. We'll be joined by one of their members very shortly.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 10:27 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Emily Carver.
Yes, the LGB Alliance is hosting its annual conference today, highlighting issues facing lesbians, gay men and bisexuals.
Well, the charity has been labelled as anti-trans and bigoted in the past for taking the T out of the widely used acronym LGBT.
Yes, this comes as a day after our GBN poll revealed that 30% of Brits think that a transgender woman is a woman.
Well, women's rights campaigner Jo Bartoshuk joins us live from the conference. Jo, thank you for making the time this morning. Of course, the organisation that you represent has faced quite a deal of criticism from within those who identify as not straight for being exclusionary to a group that many people would think of as a sort of part of that sort of community. What do you say to that criticism?
Well, firstly, I should probably correct you and say that I'm not actually representing LGB Alliance. I am speaking at the conference later, but I'm not sort of, speaking on behalf of them right now. With regards to the accusation that LGB Alliance are exclusionary, I think it is perfectly legitimate to have organisations that focus on gender identity, that focus on trans issues. I also think it is entirely legitimate to have organisations that focus upon those of us who are same-sex attracted. And I don't think there's really any natural pairing between sexual orientation, so who you fancy, and identity, who you think you are. And I think actually the sort of marrying together of these two issues has been part of a funding strategy by the large LGBT organisations like Stonewall.
Jo, why do you think you get so much backlash? LGB Alliance, I've seen it online, I've seen, video footage of people kicking off. They don't like the fact that you don't have the T in the LGB Alliance. Why do you think there's so much anger there?
A lot of the anger actually comes from cognitive dissonance. I think people haven't thought through the issues. Because if you argue, for example, that a trans woman is a woman, then logically it follows some of those trans women will be lesbians. So that means, for example, that you have to accept the idea of a lesbian with a penis, or a trans man who identifies as gay with a vulva. Now, that's actually quite homophobic as a concept. That's really offensive to a lot of us who are same-sex attractive. And we have at the conference today people like Simon Fanshawe, who was one of the founding fathers of Stonewall, and he's now come to realise that actually there are problems about adding gender identity to sexual orientation. So I think actually a lot of the anger is misdirected, I think it's misunderstood, and I think frankly it's because people haven't bothered to think through the issues and they're just sort of taking the easiest route.
It is interesting, though, how proportionally few people of minority sexual interest identify with just the letters LGB alone. YouGov did a poll back in June of this year that found that just 4% of non-straight men would identify as LGB, with the rest going with LGBTQ, LGBT, LGBT+, and those are the ones. Just 4% said LGB, whereas with women who have sex with women, just 2% identified with the acronym LGB rather than the other ones that include transgender people. Is this organisation particularly representative?
Absolutely, I think it is. As I say, I think, I mean, you know, most people, why should any particular group be tasked with sort of unpicking what lobby groups, what very wealthy lobby groups have spent a long time embedding into policy, into structures, into institutions? I think the default setting is be kind. And I think the split you've seen there between the 4% as, and I would like to see how that poll was conducted, but the 4% who apparently identify as men, who are, well, as you say, men who have sex with men, so I would say gay or bisexual men. And the disparity between that and the 2% of women, I think actually that shows that women have a far greater social pressure to be kind and to be nice and to be accepting. And I think that in itself shows why sex matters, why sex difference matters, and why this is the idea of things like lesbians with penises is putting a huge amount of pressure on the lesbian community.
Now, Joe, sorry, we're running out of time, but I do want to get this question in because this is something that many of our viewers and listeners are concerned about, and it is the theme of the Alliance conference today, which is how schools are approaching transition among young people with gender dysphoria or who are gender non-conforming. What concerns do you expect to be raised about this?
Yeah, so speaking at the moment, there's a massive concern in fact that the guidance that was promised in 2018 hasn't yet materialised, and also that there has been a huge rise in young women in particular identifying as men. And we know that a disproportionate number of those would have otherwise grown up to be healthy lesbians. And what is happening is they are being put on a medical pathway, they are binding their breasts, they are sometimes undergoing sometimes they're obtaining hormones online, and that can lead to sterilisation, and that can lead to massive health problems. So essentially, I think what we are fighting here, and what is going on particularly with some of the conversations around schools, is this is gay eugenics.
Thank you very much indeed for your time, Joe Bartosh there, women's rights campaigner, live from the LGB Alliance conference.
Gosh, yes, no, some forthright opinions
I think, you know, you asked the question, why are they not identifying with the LGB Alliance? And it may be because it's been demonised or they just have never heard of it.
I suppose that is one explanation, but I do think that generally there is this sort of sense of solidarity with the sexual minorities in this country and others that perhaps is a sense of solidarity there.
Well, we'll come back to this maybe, but still to come.
The debanking report is now out and Farage has not held back in his response.
BBC Slammed, State of Israel's official Twitter account, has tweeted out a damning BBC World parody video. We'll debate whether that's appropriate.
That and so much more after your morning news with Tatiana.
Tom, thank you. The latest from the GB Newsroom. MPs are warning vulnerable people are being put at risk by the Home Office under its plans to clear the asylum backlog. The Public Accounts Committee says the government's plans are incomplete and unrealistic. At the end of June this year, there were almost 68,000 asylum cases awaiting a decision. The government says it already has measures in place to deal with the backlog. British citizens fleeing the Middle East conflict will be able to access benefits after arriving in the UK. This also includes Britons escaping from Lebanon and the West Bank. They'll be able to claim universal credit as well as disability and child benefits without delay. They can also access social housing and housing assistance if needed. Meanwhile, hundreds of UK lawyers have sent an open letter to the Prime Minister asking him to press for a ceasefire to allow aid into Gaza. The Education Secretary says there are no wider cultural problems within her party after MP Crispin Blunt was arrested on suspicion of rape and the possession of controlled substances. Gillian Keegan told GB News most of her colleagues act with integrity. The Reigate MP has been removed from the party and asked to stay away from Parliament. Mr Blunt says he'll cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation and says he's confident he won't be charged. NHS waiting lists could top 8 million by next summer, even if strike action doesn't continue. If strikes were to continue, the list could be 180,000 higher. More than 7.75 million people were waiting for treatment last month. But the NHS says it's making progress, claiming they've more than halved waits of over 65 weeks. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2135 and €1.1488. The price of gold, £1,637 and 77 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,378 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
A very good morning. It's 10:40 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and with Emily Carver.
You are. Now, Nigel Farage has responded to the FCA's report. It had identified potential regulatory breaches in NatWest's handling of a decision to close former Brexit Party leader's account.
Well, we're pleased to be joined by the author and journalist Emma Wolfe, and might I just say it's actually Emma's birthday today, so happy birthday!
Happy birthday! Thank you.
I don't think I'm going to quite sing, but and we're also joined by the political commentator Matthew Stadlen, who is not celebrating his birthday today.
When's your birthday, Matthew?
7th of December.
7th of
Oh,
December.
that's not far away actually. We'll have to get you back in for the 7th. But yes, let's kick off actually with this story, because this has been a long-running saga. Emma.
It has. Nigel Farage, NatWest are seriously claiming that their decision to debank Nigel Farage was not about Brexit. In their subject access request, they mention the word Brexit 86 times. It's completely ludicrous. I agree with Nigel Farage. This is a mealy-mouthed decision that they've come up with. It's a sort of, well, there were issues there, but they need to be looked into. I don't want to live in a world where our banks or our utility companies or our water, electricity, gas, whoever is judging me for my political views. I think there's a real issue at stake here. Of course, Nigel Farage has a much bigger profile than most people. Of course, he's very well known for his views. But I think that this is a dangerous precedent to set, whereby companies who should be, basically providing a basic service are starting to judge us, starting to give us their woke nonsense, starting to, that's not a world I want to live in.
No, I think it would be reprehensible if we all started losing our... Well, if, people who were a bit too right-wing for the bank or the utility companies...
frankly...
Sorry, your views don't align with our values.
It cuts both ways. I don't want communists to lose access to their vital services as well. Goodness me. But Matthew, what do you make of this?
Well, I think that the report is clear that it was the decision to close Nigel's account was lawful, but the mistakes were made. Nigel seems very angry at this report and has cast aspersions over those who came up with the report. It was independent, who am I to say otherwise, and it does accept that mistakes were made, and NatWest themselves have accepted the mistakes are made. I agree, banking is close to a fundamental right, and we need to be able to bank pretty much regardless of our political views, because without a bank account in the modern world, it's almost impossible to function.
Certainly.
I just feel this muddies the waters when people start being told, sorry, you can't bank with us for this reason. You can't. And in a way, you said it cuts both ways. In a way, it does cut both ways, because we have a choice with whom we bank. I can decide that Barclays are, they don't align with my values. I can go to Santander, whatever. So I can see that, but it's this idea that they're going to start mining through our social media tweets and just checking sort of, what you've said in the past. I just think there's something really quite fundamental about your water, your gas, having a bank account, as you say. A landlord's going to start asking us for our views on things as social media history. I just think, I think something here...
It is true that this thing called PEP, a sort of politically exposed person, requires banks, as I understand it, to do serious due diligence on those customers or on those applicants for bank accounts. So there are laws in place that require banks to act in certain ways, but broadly speaking, I think we're on a very slippery slope if banks are closing people's bank accounts because of their political views. But let's just be clear, the independent report says that is not what happened here. Yes, these considerations were considered and supported the decision, but the decision was made for commercial reasons.
Nigel Farage has questioned whether there was bias within the report based on who conducted it, saying that... so it's a Travers Smith report. He says it's been whitewashed and points to the fact that the Emeritus Chair, Chris Hale, is a pro-Remain lawyer who once described Brexiteers as racist and xenophobic. So those are Nigel Farage's views. He thinks that this isn't a fair report. And we've seen from subject access requests how some employees of NatWest Coutts thought of him. So there we go. Shall we move on? Shall we move on to Steve Coogan's comments, Emma? Steve Coogan says most royal fans are flag-waving idiots as he denounces problematic Windsors.
What a patronising so-and-so he is. Starters, he says, the royal family have their foot on the throat of working-class people. I don't think most working-class people, as he puts it, feel that at all. I think
Aren't the royals more popular among the working class than the middle class?
But also, I don't want to talk about them en masse. They can make their decision. They can make their own decision about how they feel about the royal family. But I mean, we should point out, Steve Coogan has made his career. He's made his millions from, from people who watch his stupid films, his stupid, idiotic character, Alan Partridge. I mean, there is one film...
I love Alan Partridge.
OK, well, you love Alan Partridge. I think he's I think he's an absolute...
Aha!
Oh, my God. I just want to leave. I just walk out.
Very quickly, that my wife is a great fan of Alan Partridge because she thinks I resemble Alan Partridge.
Oh,
well,
really?
that doesn't shock me.
That's, but I suppose, to some extent, it's odd because Alan Partridge is a character that is playing up to a lot of the stereotypes that Steve Coogan sort of would feel himself the opposite of. Alan Partridge, as a character, is quite monarchist, is all of these other things. I wonder, does that mean we should see this sort of character of his in a different light?
Look, we all celebrate, don't we, free speech. I mean, that underpins GB News. So Steve Coogan is entitled to his views. I happen to think he's expressed them pretty poorly in this case, because how many people watched the Queen's funeral? 20 million, 28 million? How many people watched the coronation? 20 million, 28 million is one way round or the other. So to suggest that these people, tens of millions of us, are kind of idiots seems to me to have got it quite badly wrong. He's been under the spotlight recently, Steve Coogan, because he's been playing Jimmy Savile's character, hasn't he, in the BBC drama. And he's also signed a letter very recently condemning Israel's attacks, as he sees it, on Gaza. And I just want to clarify there, because I thought that letter was bang out of order in not specifically mentioning the atrocities committed by Hamas. But in the last 5 days, Coogan has come out and says, of course, I absolutely condemn.
It is interesting he did it that way round, though. First condemning Israel and then only later condemning Hamas.
Yeah, I think on this, it's interesting because, I mean, he says it goes without saying that what they did was horrendous. And to an extent, it does. I mean,
I don't think it does, though, because there are
Emily,
supporters of Hamas.
There are, but those people are very, 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 very bad people. Any right-minded person in Britain who even considers for a second that the murdering and butchering of children, the rape of children, the murdering of innocents, the taking of children as hostages, or anyone as hostages, anyone who thinks that that is remotely justifiable, I'm afraid is on the extreme fringes. So I sort of understand that, but because this is such a toxic issue, because it is so politically heated within our own society, I think it was a badly misjudged letter.
Yes.
Emma, do you think that we're talking a lot about Steve Coogan? Perhaps we've spoken more about him in the last week than we have in the last year or so. Do you think he's saying some of these things just so that people do talk about him?
I think he's a little bit like Gary Lineker. I think he genuinely thinks that we're interested in his views on sort of, you know, world affairs and politics and things like the royal family. I don't want to spend another second of my life thinking or looking at Steve Coogan's face. I think he's like, you know what? I thought his...
Yeah,
I doubt he cares what I think of him. I doubt I care what I think of. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. He is iconic to some people.
Iconic.
So
he won't. His films won't be remembered. Alan Partridge, he was very moving. There was a film called Philomena in which he starred with Judi Dench. That was beautiful, and for a moment it made me think, do you know what? He's a very fine actor, and I'm afraid he's gone from, you know.
He's not the only. Let's face it, guys. I mean, he's not the only actor, is he?
No.
Who's become known or partly known for their views.
But you know what annoys me is that, you know, he calls royal fans flag-waving idiots. He wouldn't call, you know, those people who go out on the Remain marches waving the EU flag idiots.
Or waving Palestinian flags.
Or Palestinian flags or any other flag.
No, most flags apart from the UK flag seem to be okay.
Only that.
But we did touch on Israel there for a moment, and there is a rather interesting thing that the State of Israel's Twitter account has tweeted. The official State of Israel's Twitter account this morning has tweeted a parody video about the BBC. Let's have a little look.
Good evening from London. Here are some news from the war in Gaza. Israel has bombed a hospital, killing hundreds of innocent people. More. Much better. With more details, our Middle East correspondent, Harry Whitegilt.
Good evening, Rachel, from the illegal colony of Tel Aviv. Israeli officials has denied bombing the hospital, but we have video footage showing what really...
Now, this is a pretty stark thing for the official State of Israel account to have tweeted, to have posted. I suppose, Matthew, it shows the strength of feeling in Israel about how much the BBC has stuck its foot in it.
Well, so I hadn't seen this until your producer showed me the video this morning. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I had to believe it because there it was on the official Israel Twitter account or X account. I found it shocking. I found it wholly inappropriate. The idea that a state is attacking the BBC seems to me to be absurd and not in Israel's own interests. And yes, it's important to laugh at times, even in times of horror. I interviewed John Cleese the other day for my podcast. He said when people in Sarajevo were under siege, I think there was a sort of below-ground cinema where people would go specifically to laugh, to try to get some relief from the horrors around them. So laughter's one thing, but doing it in this way seems to be deeply inappropriate.
Are they not, Emma, I'll come to you on this, are they not trying to make a serious point? We may say it's inappropriate or a bit tasteless to make satire over something so horrendous that's going on in the Middle East. But are they not trying to make a more serious point that the BBC has failed in terms of impartiality, because we had the incident of the strike on a hospital? The BBC immediately put out a statement from Palestinian officials, aka Hamas, saying that it was an Israeli strike. Then that was debunked, but you know the false story travels the world far quicker than the correction.
OK, and if that is their... I mean, I think the whole issue around the BBC has been way overblown. I think there are far, far more important issues happening on the ground out there.
Calling Hamas terrorists, not calling Hamas terrorists?
I'm afraid that's language, that's semantics. I don't care. I don't care. We all know what we mean. I think that was massively overblown. I think it's navel-gazing. I think it's pearl-clutching. I think it's us, again, talking about Auntie. It's us talking about the BBC at a time when pregnant women were having unborn babies cut out of their wombs, when the atrocities are unbearable. I don't care. I don't care. The BBC get themselves into a pickle. They desperately try and be impartial. You know what they do. They're trying to be balanced. They don't know what to do. Then they don't correct the issue.
Is there an institutional problem here, though? Because the day that Joe Biden was visiting the Middle East, he had his meetings in Jordan and in Saudi Arabia with the president of Egypt. They had all of those cancelled. They had all of those cancelled immediately after the bombing of this hospital. I have no doubt in my mind that the BBC's initial reporting of this contributed to those Arab leaders cancelling those meetings. That set back the cause of peace.
Accurate reporting, especially in a war zone, is paramount. Of course, you're absolutely right. I was responding to Emily talking about the issue of whether or not they called them by the specific word terrorist or whether they just made it clear that it was a horrific atrocity.
I disagree with Emma on this. I agree with her in the sense I don't think the BBC comes from a bad place. I don't think this is deliberate bias in any way. However, I do think you call a terrorist, and what those Hamas medievalists did in Israel was so obviously terrorism. I find it quite upsetting, actually, the BBC didn't call them terrorists. Accuracy in war reporting is absolutely critical because, of course, there's going to be spin and worse from both sides or all sides. It's very difficult to report independently what's coming out of Gaza because there are so few independent journalists in Gaza, and of course Hamas run Gaza, including the health ministry. I'll just say this in defence of Israel, and I think what it's doing in Gaza is wrong. I think there is a confusion of Palestinian innocents, including children, with Hamas, and I would call for much greater restraint than what we're seeing at the moment. Israel is still a state in trauma. So even though I think it is acting in a heavy-handed way, it's only 3 weeks ago tomorrow that these atrocities were carried out. And in that context, maybe we should see the Twitter video that we are looking at. I still think it was misjudged.
I can see both sides to this one, but let us know what you think at home about that video. It's quite remarkable, I mean, extraordinary.
Yeah, and then there are some moments in it where they play the recording, or they play a parody recording of the recording that we heard of Hamas terrorists saying, we did it, and all the rest of it. It does seem like a pointed piece of satire about a specific mistake that the BBC did make.
How is this a subject for, as you say, it's not even 3 weeks. How is this? Well, how is it ever? But how is this a subject for satire or parody? My basic rule is, is it even funny? It's just not funny. When we think about what's going on there, when we hear and see what's going on there, it's just not funny. It's not a subject for parody. If they had an issue with the BBC, they can raise that through diplomatic channels.
Well, Matthew, Emma, thank you very much for talking us through those issues. We'll be back with a lot more after the weather.
Hello there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. A few bright or sunny spells across the UK today, but otherwise it's showers for many of us. Some heavy downpours and in places more persistent rain. We've got low pressure sitting to the west of the UK. That continues to drive areas of rain or showers in from the southwest. But these areas of rain are once again becoming stuck across central and eastern Scotland. So the rain here will continue to top it up over the next few days, waxing and waning in intensity. However, we don't need further rain here, and so that could lead to impacts over the next few days. Elsewhere, heavy showers and some longer spells of rain, but also sunny spells in between the showers, a gusty breeze, highs of 15 Celsius in the south, 12 or 13 further north. Further showers into the evening and overnight. In fact, they could pep up across parts of southern England, especially towards the southeast for a time, and that could again cause some localised flooding. But there will be some clear spells, especially through the Midlands, East Anglia and Northern England, and where we do see those clear spells, temperatures falling into the mid-single figures, and there'll be a few mist patches first thing Saturday. Otherwise, it's a continuation of the showery theme into the weekend. Scattered showers, but those showers will move through at pace, so they'll be quite frequent and quite heavy in places. The persistent rain continues in eastern Scotland, and then later in the day, wet and windy weather pushes in towards the southwest. Bye-bye.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 11 a.m. on Friday the 27th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Emily Carver. Coming up today.
A huge challenge. That's how a group of MPs describe the challenge faced by the Home Office to tackle the asylum backlog. Is it time to rethink the entire system?
Top Tory accused of rape. The former Justice Minister, Crispin Blunt, has been arrested in connection with an allegation of rape and possession of a controlled substance. The MP said he was confident he would not be charged with any offence.
Are you ready for the Dinosaur Hour? John Cleese's new show airs Sunday on GB News. We'll be joined with one of the co-stars.
And we'd love to know what you think of all of the stories we discuss. We'll be getting to your emails in just a moment, so don't forget to email in. gbviews@gbnews.com is the address. But before all of that, let's get your morning headlines with Tatiana.
Tom, thank you and good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. This is the latest. MPs are warning vulnerable people are being put at risk over plans to clear the asylum backlog. The Public Accounts Committee says the Home Office proposal to reform the system is incomplete and unrealistic. At the end of June, there were almost 68,000 cases awaiting a decision. Shadow Environment Secretary Steve Reid says the government has lost control of the situation.
Taking an immense amount of time to deal with individual cases, and while those cases are while people are waiting for their cases to be dealt with, they're being put up in hotels at a staggering cost of £8 million a day. It's shocking. What Labour would do is, instead of using that money on hotel bills, we would use it to recruit 1,000 additional civil servants to deal with these cases faster. That would reduce the hotel bill, the scheme would pay for itself, and then you would get the cases processed much faster.
But the Education Secretary Gillian Keegan says the government already has measures in place to deal with the backlog.
We have got tough on immigration. We're the people who have introduced new legislation because obviously you have to have the law behind you. We've also obviously had the Rwanda policy, which is still in the courts, but that is part of the policy, and we've also got returns agreements now with a number of countries and a new agreement with France as well. We're also looking at alternatives to hotels to bring that bill down to the taxpayer. So we are the ones taking all of the actions, but there is no doubt that this is a huge problem.
Hamas says the Israeli bombing of Gaza has killed 50 hostages so far. It comes as Israel intensified its attacks on the Strip, striking dozens of terrorist targets over the past couple of days. Hamas says it can't release hostages seized during an attack on Israel until a ceasefire is agreed. It claims it needs time to locate all of those who've been taken from Israel to Gaza. British citizens fleeing the Middle East conflict will be able to access benefits after arriving in the UK. This also includes Britons escaping from Lebanon and the West Bank. They'll be able to claim universal credit as well as disability and child benefits without delay. They can also access social housing and housing assistance if needed. Meanwhile, hundreds of UK lawyers sent an open letter to the Prime Minister asking him to press for a ceasefire to allow aid into Gaza. The letter says the UK needs to follow international law and not encourage, aid or assist the law's violation by others. The Education Secretary says there are no cultural problems within her party after a senior MP was arrested on suspicion of rape and the possession of controlled substances. Gillian Keegan told GB News most of her colleagues act with integrity. Crispin Blunt was detained by Surrey police yesterday and then released on conditional bail. He's been removed from the party and asked to stay away from Parliament. The MP says he'll cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation, and he says he's confident he won't be charged. NHS waiting lists could top 8 million by next summer, even if strike action doesn't continue. The Health Foundation says the number will peak by August before starting to come down. But if strikes were to continue, that list could be 180,000 higher. More than 7.5 million people were waiting for treatment just last month. But the NHS says it's making progress, claiming they've more than halved waits of more than 65 weeks. Now, around 1.7 million people could be living with dementia in England and Wales by 2040, according to new research. That's according to the University College of London, which previously predicted the figure could reach 1.2 million. They found that dementia cases rose by a quarter between 2008 and 2016. The government has pledged it will provide £160 million a year for dementia research by 2025. And plans have been approved by Merton Council to expand the All England Tennis Club. The decision followed a lengthy planning committee meeting that concluded late last night. The ground will almost triple in size and allow Wimbledon to host the qualifying tournaments. Completion is projected for 2030 and will see an increase in the capacity of the championships from 42 to 50,000. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio, and now on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
It's 11:06 in the morning. You're Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Emily Carver, and Tom Harwood. Lots of you have been getting in touch about all the issues, really, that we've been discussing today. On immigration, we were talking about the asylum backlog and how the government needs to get a grip of it, so say the Public Accounts Committee, at least. Well, who should we go to? Mel says, immigration officials could get through the backlog in a few weeks by asking each applicant 2 questions. Which country did you last come from? Do you have any identification documents? If the answer to question 2 is none, use the information from question 1 to send them back to. So Mel takes a strong stance.
She does. And Tony asks a really pertinent question. He says, the most important question is why do the French allow so many fewer into France? And I looked this up because France actually had more asylum applications than the UK last year, but it only answered 25% of them positively. So the French had, let me just double check this number, because the French had almost 150,000 people apply for asylum in their country. Now, we had under 100,000, so they had 50% more applications than the UK did. Yeah. But they only approved a quarter of them.
Well, this plays into the idea that many suspect that perhaps we're a little bit of a soft touch, maybe we're a little bit more lenient, or are more asylum seekers have they got that come to Britain?
Have more links with Britain,
do they have
or
more links or whatever?
More of a claim? I mean, it seems unlikely that it would be that starkly different.
Something's going on there. And Nick says, are we just granting asylum to everyone to clear the backlog? I haven't heard of any deportations reported in the news. Yes, there was a lot of talk about an amnesty, and of course that's raised a lot of eyebrows, that from some countries, if you come from some countries, you'll just sort of be waved through. But we'll keep an eye on it.
We will.
For you.
Something else that the audience seems to be keeping an eye on this morning, Emily, is you. Not least Helen, who says, I just wanted to say how lovely Emily looks this morning. Her hair is fab.
The hair and beauty team this morning have done a fabulous job.
Well, also, I think I should say, whichever programme she presents is articulate, knowledgeable and, above all, cheerful. So, which is, I think, more important than the resplendent glow you have this morning. But clearly both important factors.
I saw someone also say that Tom Harwood looked especially handsome this morning. I can't find the email, but I did see it.
Doesn't exist.
I did see it.
It's not real.
Shall we move on?
Let's move on. This is entirely introspective. Now, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has pledged that the Home Office would clear a huge number of asylum claims by the end of this year. Well, it seems he's nowhere near delivering.
Yes, a report by a cross-party committee says a huge challenge remains for the Home Office, and the government's plan to reform the asylum system to speed the process up is incomplete and unrealistic.
Well, joining us for what is bound to be a robust debate is the Deputy Leader of the UK Independence Party, Rebecca Jane, and the international human rights lawyer, David Hay. And David, let's just start with you. Why is it the case that the UK is so much slower than other countries at processing these claims?
Well, I think that's one to ask the government. I mean, you know, they're completely, from my side, they're completely incompetent in terms of processing these claims. I mean, it's not something new. We shouldn't have the backlog that we've got. Not only does it cost the country millions of pounds, it actually harms the genuine asylum seekers whose lives are in limbo. So why that number is so high is that, simply put, that the government is incompetent in terms of bringing it down. There's no reason it should be that high.
But David, we've heard that the government are doing everything they can to speed up the process, including shortening interviews and perhaps not being as rigorous as they could be. One worry from the public is that if you speed up the claims process too quickly, what you have is essentially a little bit of an amnesty. You're waving through claims quicker than you should be.
I mean, I think from what you've described, Emily, and from what I've read in the report today, that's what I would describe as cooking the books, and I think that's what the Conservative parties are doing in relation to the asylum figures, because changing the way that you calculate whether someone is on a list or taken off a list, that's cooking the books, and that's essentially what they're doing. They're taking the British people for fools. The people are still there. They're just changing the way that they're viewing these figures, and that is, and I think anyone that's read this committee report will clearly see that that's what the government is doing. Not only are they not protecting us, the Brits, in terms of the people they're letting in, they're not protecting the genuine asylum seekers either. And the report that I read today is very damning. It's a catastrophe for their policy.
Rebecca, let's bring you in there, because what David is saying is that both the British people are feeling like let down, but also those seeking asylum, those genuinely seeking asylum, are getting a rough time too.
It's a fair point to make, but I think that we can all call this for exactly what it is. Rishi Sunak is completely incompetent in actually what he has done with everything. I don't actually know one thing of where he's actually following through on all of these claims that he wants to make. He made a very big and outlandish claim that we will clear this backlog by the end of the year. You've still got 55,000 applications to go. Why are you not in front of us trying to tell us why you've got such a problem with this and why you aren't delivering on your so-called promises that you try and make? Shortening the interviews is absolutely appalling, because we are one of the only countries to have the worst process that there is. We have no security measures in place. As much of an interview that they get is a sit down with a social worker, and they can tell them that they're absolutely anybody, and they are expected to believe them. This is a national security threat for us all. And there's one point actually that I wanted to pick up on, Tom, that you just related to actually when you were introducing us. Did you know that in 2004 we rejected 89%? Hang on, let me get it 100% correct. Yes, 89% were rejected. And now we approve 88% of applications. You cannot just wave through these applications because you want to clear a backlog. You have to do what's in the best interest of the people in this country. And that's not it.
David, is that true, the statistics that Rebecca Jane has just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that sounds familiar to me, and I'd agree with Rebecca on that. And if you imagine, if you're an asylum seeker and you're trying to put forward your case of grave human rights abuses, you can't do that on a piece of paper in a questionnaire. You can't do that in a few minutes in an interview. You need to be detailed investigation of that, and that's something that, again, like I said,
David, sorry to interrupt, but it was back in February it was reported that asylum seekers will be given the right to live in the UK without having face-to-face interviews to check their claims. This was to reduce the backlog of cases. Many people describe this as essentially being an amnesty for people from a selection of countries. 5 countries were cited: Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Eritrea and Yemen, to fast-track these claims. Surely that is not the right way of doing it. Just because you've got a very, very long backlog does not mean you should be waving through applications, not least for national security reasons.
Well, I agree with you 100%. I mean, it's not, that's not what, that's essentially opening the gates. At the end of the day, we need to have genuine asylum seekers. We don't have the capacity to have everyone in the country. We need the genuine ones in that genuinely need our help. We can't just open the gates and let everybody in. And that's not the way to do it, because that's not clearing a backlog. That's just letting everyone in. And like I said, genuine asylum seekers, and there are many genuine asylum seekers, need to be able to present their cases in a proper manner. Waving them through a short questionnaire or short interview isn't going to enable us to decide whether or not they are genuine.
So, Rebecca, what is your answer to this? Because, of course, we're seeing lots and lots of countries face a huge number of asylum applications. We were talking just about France, which has had 50% more applications than the UK. But, of course, they approve a far smaller proportion of those applications. My question to you, Rebecca Jane, is the number that apply actually the issue, or is it simply the way that we process them that is?
I think the issue is that, like you said, Britain is a soft touch, so it's the easiest solution of all, especially when they get the benefits and the healthcare that we deliver. So none of this is a solution. The only solution, and actually I liked a lot of what the viewers have been saying, you know, find out where they've come from. If that's a safe country, go back there. It's their problem. We can't take the responsibility of the whole world on our shoulders. You know, we need a hard border in the sea. We need to stop giving all of our money to France, for goodness sakes, that's an absolute joke of a situation of somebody that hasn't even delivered on the job that they're supposed to do, and we give them more money. That has to stop. We have to get tough. We have to send out a message to the world. If you are a genuine asylum seeker who's genuinely fleeing persecution, we are a supportive and welcoming nation. But right now, we have to close our doors. In my personal opinion, it's not quite a UKIP policy, but I think it should be. I think that we have to have a stop on this for 5 years, because our country is broken, our country is full, and whilst we carry on talking about this, and obviously we get it all the time, you're racist, blah, blah, blah. No, we're not. This is about space. It's not about race. We're full. We can't cope. NHS is broken. Policing is broken. Our backlog system is even broken, for goodness sakes. Close the doors, send them back to
Rebecca, I suppose there'd be many people who'd say to that we do have big labour shortages in this country. There are big not waiting lists, but recruitment lists for people to work, particularly in low-skilled jobs. Let's throw this over to David. Are we full?
I mean, I think, we've got at the current, and this is the problem that we have. We have laws, and they're our own laws, and they're the laws from Europe that we and our previous governments entered into. So until we change those laws, we have to accept that, we have to go through the process of accepting the asylum seekers in accordance with the laws that we previously signed up to. So that's one of the problems that you've got. And then, of course, you've got the complete failure of the government to deal with the process, to do things quickly, to do things efficiently or cost effectively. It's a complete and utter chaotic mess. And all we're seeing from Sunak and his government is spin and as we saw this morning, more sleaze, but no actual action. It's, every day there's another migration catastrophe in terms of the headlines, and nothing's been done. And at the end of the day, there's real humans, both here in England, that are suffering because of the asylum process and the asylum seekers. So it's a no-win.
Mm-hmm. David, you're a human rights lawyer, so you'll know about this more than most. Should we be giving the right to appeal for most asylum seekers? Because one of the points that is made by the Public Accounts Committee is that even if you hasten the speed at which we clear the backlog, that will lead to a backlog in our court system. We know that the courts are under a lot of stress at the moment, a lot of pressure. Do you think perhaps, the court system's getting too clogged up with these kind of cases?
I think we should have the right of appeal, but what I think we should do first is make the actual first judgment of that application stronger, more detailed, and so that there's less likely to be routes for appeal at the next stage. So have a proper process at the beginning, a detailed one, but a fast one, and then that as well. And if there are genuine reasons for appeal, look at that. But the problem is that if we're just waving people through or refusing people and not really looking at their cases, of course there's going to be lots and lots and lots of causes for appeal. And again, part of the problem.
Well, let's turn a final word now to Rebecca and close this debate, because I suppose there will be some who say that it's not about a moratorium, it's not about the numbers, it is about that processing.
It is about, I really like actually what David said there, because the problem why we're getting so many appeals is because there is no decent process in place in the first case. Having that conversation with a social worker or not having a conversation, of course that they're going to have a heck of a lot of grounds for appeal. You have to sort it out. Do you know the way that we first start to sort it out? The Conservative Party put their hands up and go, guess what, guys? We got it wrong. We're really sorry. And here is what we're going to do. And actually get tough on immigration. not keep on giving us all of these nonsensical soundbites because they want votes in the next general election.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. That was a fantastic debate there. We had Rebecca Jane, Deputy Leader of UKIP, and international human rights lawyer David Hay. Thank you very much.
Both making reasonable points, I think. This stat, 89% were rejected at the turn of the century, and now 88% are approved today. Something has gone really, really haywire.
Also, am I right in thinking that the Illegal Migration Act, which is of course passed into law, takes away the right to appeal in some circumstances?
In some circumstances, I believe what the Illegal Migration Act does is if someone arrives by illegal means, they don't get the right to claim in the United Kingdom or appeal in the United Kingdom.
Which is by channel crossing, presumably?
Yes, yes.
Well, maybe, is it retrospectively applied?
I think there was actually an amendment to do with this. Before we get bogged down in the details, there was an amendment. Originally, it was going to be at the time at which the legislation was introduced, but the Lords then kicked that out, and it's only taking effect from royal assent. That was one of the battles between the Commons and the Lords on that bill, if I'm remembering correctly.
Let us know if you have a different interpretation of the law there, but I think you're spot on. Still to come, Noam Sagi, whose mother Hamas took hostage, spoke to the UK's chief rabbi earlier this morning. We'll talk to GB News' Lisa Hartley, who attended the event, in just one moment.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
News.
Very good morning to you. It's just gone 11:25 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with Emily Carver and me, Tom Harwood.
Yes, you may have seen comedy legend John Cleese's new series trailed on the channel over the last few weeks, but in case you missed it, let's have a quick look.
We're here for the show.
What show?
We're filming a television show.
This is a medieval castle, you silly man. It's for besieging and sword fighting. It's not for some so-called television program.
But we made arrangements.
A strange person.
I am bored of you. Your auntie soiled her knickers, and your mother was a vacuum cleaner. Huh?
Let us in.
I spit on your gonads, you quarter-witted son of a cabbage hunter.
Is there someone else up there that I can speak to?
Go boil your bottom.
Can you throw him off the ramparts, please?
All right.
Well, and the man with the incredibly strong arms then, who was able to chuck a French-sounding John Cleese over the ramparts, is, of course, GB News' very own Lewis Schaefer. And Lewis, yes, I mean, congratulations, first of all, for lobbying. I mean, have you thrown a man over a castle before?
I didn't, and no men were hurt in the process of making that thing. You should tell the people out there. You tell Ofcom there's nobody was hurt. And everything's okay.
Okay, well, that's television magic.
We had a health and safety assessment.
I bet there was.
Okay, good.
It was actually filmed. Half of it was filmed on top of a roof. It had in a castle, in a proper castle.
And this is a Norman castle, a 1,000-year-old castle where this is filmed.
Yeah, which is a good example of what's going to happen to Britain. We're going to have to go up in castles to protect ourselves from evil. Sorry, being a bit political there. No, it's a castle.
Yes, we could all live in castles.
I think that the skirmishes of the Middle East haven't quite spilled over onto the streets of Britain quite yet. But this new programme is comedy legend John Cleese. What's the format of it?
Well, it's comedy legend John Cleese. It's doing what he ever wanted to do, but it's also, you have to remember, it's comedy legend Lewis Schaefer is also in this. I'm not getting enough credit for this. But yeah, it's John Cleese. It's an amazing... First of all, he hasn't been on the air. You forget how amazing the guy is. I forgot.
His voice.
His voice, who he is, what he's brought to this country is amazing. And I'm in America, and we loved him in America too. And people here, I don't think really.
Who's more funny, Brits or Americans?
I think Brits are less funny than Americans.
Less funny?
Yeah. They're less.
So you go for the American
this is a real debate
over the British office.
Because I don't know. I didn't. Yeah. Remember this about British people is you want to be funny. You're probably more funny because you try to be funny all the time. You're relentlessly funny. You start the day with have a nice. Is it rainy enough for you on a rainy day, or is it cold enough for you on a cold day? So you try to be funny. All right, you're funny. It means so much to you. I'm not going to say you're not funny. You're beautiful, handsome.
Our viewers and listeners decide who's funnier. So is this show...
Don't have them judge it based on me.
Is it a selection of sketches and interviews? Tell us a little bit more.
It's indescribable what it is. It's basically John Cleese talking to some of his favourite people, some amazing people.
We've seen some really big names in the trailers that have so far been released.
Yes, it's going to be this. Tim Rice came in and Caitlyn Jenner was there. It was like shocking.
Stephen Fry.
We can't go over the entire names, but it's amazing names. Plus, it's while this is going on, weird bits of surreal stuff. It's like nothing that I've ever seen, even on British television.
Does it feel good?
Does the show feel good?
Does it feel good, you know? Will it make people at home feel warm inside?
I think it will. It will. There's no hostility. It's all love. John Cleese is one of the nicest people in the world. He spoke to my girlfriend on the phone. My girlfriend is a huge John Cleese fan, and I gave him the phone. He spoke to my girlfriend, and he said that I sounded like a guy who was announcing the end of the world. This is what he said about me, Louis Schaefer.
Amazing.
Amazing. So it's going to make people feel so good.
Do you know what? I grew up watching Monty Python's Flying Circus. Not while it was airing, of course. I'm not from the 1970s, but I did grow up watching the clips of it online, and I had all the DVDs, Holy Grail, Life of Brian, like all the rest of it, Meaning of Life even.
Yeah.
It was my childhood, and it's just so remarkable that John Cleese, who has been such a staple of British comedy for the best part of 50 years, is still going. And going strong.
And he should be. He should have had a show. It just shows how great GB News is that GB News is giving him a show.
Well, it's aimed at the unfashionable and the out of touch, apparently. So is that you at home? Unfashionable and out of touch?
Well,
it's no. The answer is no. It's the answer. They are not. They're totally on the cutting edge. These people. And I'm the youngest person on the show. But I think everybody will like it. Everybody has a warm spot for John Cleese. The fact he hasn't been on the air until GB News offered him this says so much about what's wrong with the BBC.
Absolutely. So let's have a little look. Let's have a little reminder of when we can see this programme. Lewis, take it away.
Oh, a reminder, it's on Sunday at 9 o'clock on this channel, on GB News, and it's going to be on YouTube and a million other different places. And I'm speaking with the producer, Andrew Doyle, and sort of like DVD extras, kind of like Ricky Gervais, but not as good. No, Ricky Gervais is incredible.
So Andrew Doyle has produced the whole show, so there's another reason to watch it. Thank you very much indeed for coming in this morning.
Martin Goulet.
And Martin Goulet.
Well, there we go. The Dinosaur Hour, 9 p.m. Sunday, GB News. Do not miss it. It's going to be...
I'm certainly going to be tuning in.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Sounds right up my street.
Well, still to come, branded ridiculous. The White Company has been blasted over the selling of face masks for children.
And a split party. Labour remains divided over Starmer's line on Israel. Many believe he's alienating Muslim voters, and the Liberal left, or the far left.
Well, that and much more after your morning news with Tatiana.
Tom, thank you. It's 11:32. This is the latest from the GB Newsroom. MPs are warning vulnerable people are being put at risk over plans to clear the asylum backlog. The Public Accounts Committee says Home Office proposals to reform the system are incomplete and unrealistic. At the end of June, there were almost 68,000 cases awaiting a decision. But the government says a serious effort is being made to address the problem. British citizens fleeing the Middle East conflict will be able to access benefits after arriving in the UK. This also includes Britons escaping from Lebanon and the West Bank. Meanwhile, hundreds of UK lawyers have sent an open letter to the Prime Minister asking him to press for a ceasefire to allow aid into Gaza. The Education Secretary says there are no cultural problems within her party after MP Crispin Blunt was arrested on suspicion of rape and the possession of controlled substances. Gillian Keegan told GB News most of her colleagues act with integrity. The MP has been removed from the party and asked to stay away from Parliament. He says he'll cooperate fully with the ongoing investigation and says he's confident he won't be charged. NHS waiting lists could top 8 million by next summer, even if strike action doesn't continue. The Health Foundation says the number will peak by August before starting to come down. But if strikes were to continue, the list could be 180,000 higher. More than 7.5 million people were waiting for treatment just last month. But the NHS says it's making progress, claiming they've more than halved waits of more than 65 weeks. For more on all of those stories, you can visit our website, gbnews.com.
For exclusive, limited edition and rare gold coins that are always newsworthy, Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2132 and €1.1485. The price of gold, £1,637 and 5 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,371 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Well, after the break, we'll be joined by Lisa Hartle to bring us the very latest on the ongoing hostage crisis in Israel and how it affects the United Kingdom.
You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
A very good morning to you. It is 11:38 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with Emily Carver and me, Tom Harwood.
Yes, so earlier this morning, the chief rabbi spoke with Noam Zaghi, whose 75-year-old Israeli mother, Ada, was taken hostage by Hamas.
Well, our reporter Lisa Hartle is in London and was at the event. Lisa, tell us more about what was said and what the chief rabbi was there to really provide.
Hello, yes, well, if I just step out the way, you can see behind me
There are all of these tables and places, over 200 places set, each one to represent one of those that are being held hostage in Gaza. And if you can just see on the back of each chair, there is the name and the photograph of each of the hostages. We've got a high chair here representing the 9-month-old baby that's been taken. And as we go around, you can see there are various different items here to represent those who are currently missing. But just to explain a bit more about this is one of the organisers, Oliver, that joins me now. Oliver, thank you so much for joining us.
That's all right.
This isn't just a normal dinner. For anybody who's not in the Jewish community, can you explain what this means?
Yes, of course. So every week, Shabbat starts on Friday night, runs through to Saturday night, and Jews all over the world on Friday night come together with their family to have a Friday night dinner. They will light candles, they'll say blessings over bread and wine, and really most importantly, it's a time to be together and to be with families. And what we really wanted to show here is that there are over 200 people who aren't going to be able to be with their families this Friday night, and we've got to continue to remember them, that while we are lucky and able to have that time together, we cannot forget that those over 200 people are being held and they don't have their Shabbat dinner, they don't have their family, there will be empty places at their tables. And so we wanted to show people on a scale how many empty spaces there will be this Friday night.
And you were telling me that one of the messages from today is stronger together. Could you explain us a little bit more about that?
Yes, definitely. So being here at JW3, which is, a Jewish cultural and community centre, we work with many partners both in the Jewish community and outside the Jewish community. And at times of crisis and times like this, there are people from all walks of life who try and put wedges between especially British Jews and British Muslims. And for us now, it's really important to remember that that is something we can't have. We've got to be strong as a community in the UK, and we've got to be stronger together, and this shouldn't be a chance for people to drive those wedges between us. We have to work with our cousins in the British Muslim community and in the British Jewish community and find ways that we can come together and show that we are strong.
And earlier we heard from Noam Staghi, whose mother, 75-year-old mother, is still missing, taken hostage in Gaza. And you were telling me that you're all staying hopeful, but it's really hard at the moment.
Yeah, it is a really hard time. I mean, one of the reasons we've put on this table is because there is hope. We are reminding people that there are over 200 people currently held and that we are hopeful that they will be released. But it's a really hard time to be hopeful. It has been a long couple of weeks, especially for the British Jewish community. We have seen terrible things happen to children, to innocent civilians, and hope's really hard. We are continuing to put the message out there, and there are these posters that people are putting up all over London, which again is about making sure the message out there and making sure that hope is still there, but then we are seeing those be defaced, we're seeing them pulled down, and these are innocent people, there are children. A poster of a 3-year-old child is not a political message, and it is a humanitarian message, and it is being defaced, and it's a really hard time, but we have to keep hope, because that's the only way that we're going to get through it, and that's the only thing we can really think about to make sure those people come home.
Thank you so much. And you also, when I arrived, I was given a candle.
Yes. So what we're asking people to do, and a number of different organisations, the Jewish community this Shabbat are asking people to do, is light an extra candle and lay an extra place at their table to continue remembering those people who can't be with us. So it's really important that on Shabbat we light those candles, and it's a really important part of the religious practice that we do. So we're lighting an extra one, and everyone who came to us today was given a place card with the name and the age of one of the hostages, so that they can have that place at their table, have that empty chair, and remember those people who can't be with us.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Oliver. Thank you. So members of the public are being invited to come along here anytime between now and Monday morning.
Thank you very much indeed, Lita Hartle there in North London, and with Oliver with her there. You know what, Tom? It's been actually... Well, I can't imagine what it's like for the Jewish community there, but I was walking around a part of London where I live, and I saw one of these posters on a lamppost, and it had been torn down in part. And I just felt, how would that feel if you had family in Israel or you were part of the Jewish community, just to see that? Horrifying.
I think
horrifying. Whatever you think about Israel, Palestine and the issues there, to take down a poster of a hostage.
Oh, I mean, it just unbelievable. Let's open this wider to our panel now. Emma Wolf is with us, as is Matthew Stadlen. And Matthew, you seem to want to come in there because I understand that for a lot of the Jewish community in London, they will have family who know people. They might themselves know people who've been taken hostage.
Yeah, I have friends, close friends, who live in Tel Aviv. At the moment, that package there, I thought was the most moving thing I've seen on GB News in the last 2-3 years, however long it is that the station has been on air. I found it made me feel sick in my stomach, the thought that there are these hundreds of people still taken hostage by Hamas and that one of them is a 9-month-old baby. I also thought it was a profoundly poignant and moving way to pay tribute to these people, to pay tribute to the hope that still exists. And the gentleman who was interviewed there by your reporter, I also thought spoke very, very well amidst this deep trauma felt by many Jews in Britain and around the world, and of course the state of trauma that Israel is in at the moment, calling for good relations, ongoing good relations between the British Muslim and Jewish communities is so important. This is not a time for division, it's a time for coming together in the name of humanitarianism. And I'd just say this as well, that it is absolutely consistent to speak up for the innocents of Gaza, to call on restraint from Israel, to call on Israel to obey international law, at the same time as to mourn those who were savaged by Hamas terrorists on the 7th of October, and at the same time as calling for the immediate release of the Israeli hostages.
Well, if only everyone was so level-headed, Matthew, on this. Unfortunately, it's not. Yes, what Oliver Marcus was saying there about how important it is for Jewish communities and Muslim communities in Britain not to let this be a source of division. Unfortunately, we have seen it become a source of division. How do we repair those challenges?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, I can only echo what Matthew said. It's so sad that there's a need to polarise the debate, because it's absolutely consistent to feel, you know, compassion for, well, horror at what happened on October the 7th, and also deep compassion for every innocent life that's being taken out there. I think seeing that empty high chair, seeing those chairs for Friday night dinner was very, very moving, and I think Stronger Together is a beautiful message in this case. It's not just a soundbite. It really is a time for people in Britain, but also around the world, to come together. It's unimaginable to think of what those families, close friends and families, are going through, of those 200 people.
I think we can see with the tearing down of those posters that include, I think, children on them of Israeli hostages, we can see how hate spreads, and we can see how polarisation spreads, and so much of that stems from online, sometimes on television as well, and it's absolutely incumbent on everyone who has a platform, and that includes political commentators, presenters like ourselves, or people just simply commenting on social media, to remember that what happens online can have an impact offline.
Matthew, just on that before we move on, unfortunately, the way that this conversation is so polarised has meant that celebrities with vast followings who initially put up "I stand with Israel" after the awful terrorist attack committed by Hamas took down their posts because of negative reaction from those who didn't, you know, thought that was the wrong stance to take. It really is dreadful.
I think people feel, and have felt, under huge pressure from their social media echo chambers to say one thing or another. It was very difficult in the days immediately after the massacres that we saw in Israel committed by these medievalists from Hamas. It was very difficult to say, for goodness sake, please put pressure on Israel to obey international law. It was difficult because people would think, if you were saying such a thing, that you were somehow condoning or absolving Hamas of these atrocities, which wasn't the case at all. And of course, by the time you do feel able to speak out, it's often too late.
And of course, let's not forget, Israel, under international law, does have the right to go after Hamas terrorists. It does have the right to defend itself. But of course, as you say, there are some areas where it might be going overboard.
Yes, we're talking about consistency. It is perfectly consistent to say, as I say and continue to say, that Israel has a right to defend itself, with saying that Israel must obey international law. It is in our darkest moments. It is when we are in a state of trauma, whether it's Israel or other countries around the world, America after 9/11, it is in those moments that we have to pay even closer attention to our own responsibilities. And that was the message that Biden had. One of his messages, some say they were conflicting. He went to Israel, he said he stood shoulder to shoulder with Israel, but he warned them, begged them almost, not to make the same mistakes that we in the West have made.
Although with saying that, ISIS no longer exists. It was defeated militarily. It was defeated through a Western bombing campaign. Al-Qaeda no longer exists. People in the United States are safer today as a result of action that was taken by the United States. Now, they might have done they might have made mistakes, particularly Iraq, I think. But with regard to the immediate response to 9/11, rooting out those terrorists, assassinating Osama bin Laden, those are the right things to do.
That's a very interesting point you made. Remember, why did ISIS spring up? Why was Al-Qaeda given recruiting sergeants? Partly because of America's reaction to 9/11, partly because of the war in Afghanistan, which turned into a 20-year nightmare, partly because of the invasion of Iraq, which cost so many tens or hundreds of thousands of people their lives.
Of course, and coupled with a hideous ideology. Of course, I'd just like to say, people can think more than one thing at once, can't they?
Yes.
You can condemn all sorts of things at the same time.
But we do have so many more stories
let's
to get
move
through
on.
this morning.
Go on then, Tom.
Emma Wolf, this issue over Nigel Farage and his bank account. The Financial Conduct Authority has released a new report which has identified regulatory breaches.
Regulatory breaches. It's a very, very odd situation, this, and we were just talking about it. NatWest seriously claiming that it was nothing to do with Brexit, and yet they mentioned Brexit 86 times in their subject access request. And obviously Nigel Farage is really unhappy about this. I think this is the issue of being judged for your values, being judged by a service company about whether your values align with their values, whether your views are sensitive, whether your views are basically woke enough for them. This is the issue, I think, now in 2023, and I think it's a deeply fundamental issue at the heart of, Britain, but also of the way we want to live our lives. Do we want to be judged by our bank? Do we want to be told they won't, British Gas won't supply us with power because we didn't vote the right way in the last election, or that we said something wrong on social media? I don't.
Well, Nigel Farage, Matthew, isn't very happy with what he's read from this review.
No, he's not. And he's cast aspersions, hasn't he, on the independence of this review. That's not for me to do. It says it's an independent review. I hope and believe that it was. Must remember that they have found failings in NatWest and the way that they dealt with this issue. NatWest themselves have come out and accepted that they've made failings. What it does say, however, though, is that the decision to close Nigel's bank account was legal. I agree, by the way, with the gist of what Emma is saying. Banking is a fundamental right, and we withdraw it from people at our peril. You can't survive, really, in a modern democracy such as our own without the ability to bank. And therefore, if people's bank accounts were to be closed down for political reasons, that's a very dangerous and slippery slope.
And, of course, this whole thing allowed Nigel Farage to highlight where other people's bank accounts have been closed. So this is not just about Nigel Farage.
We saw Gina Miller, for example, find it very, very hard to start a bank account for her political party. But with that, let's turn up and have a little look at what's coming up next on the live desk with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson. Pip, what's coming up on today's programme?
Good afternoon. Well, another 8 aid trucks are due to enter Gaza, delivering that vital humanitarian aid. We'll be bringing you an update on that as the calls continue for a ceasefire. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is the latest to ask for that. And also the Israeli military now says it's taken out another top Hamas commander. Also this lunchtime, there's more woes for Rishi Sunak as the MP Crispin Blunt says he's been arrested on suspicion of rape and possession of controlled substances. We'll be asking, how are the Tories going to fare in yet another by-election? Plus, the damning new report that's identified the huge challenge for the Home Office to clear the backlog in the asylum system. Plus, we're not in the final of the Rugby World Cup final, But we are playing tonight against Argentina. We'll be looking at that. Stay with us.
Well, a huge amount to get stuck
Yeah,
into.
fingers crossed for third place.
We've come to the end of our show, though.
Yes, no, I should thank both Matthew Stadlen and Emma Wolf for our news review there. And also, I must say to you, Pip, what a marvellous poppy. It puts ours to shame. But we'll look forward to all of that coming up on the live desk with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson next. And Britain's Newsroom is back, of course, on Monday from 9:30.
Hello there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. A few bright or sunny spells across the UK today, but